Hello and welcome! Vintage Super League is back. I'm Randy. That is top 8 competitor Luis Scott Vargas. You've got to still be floating on cloud 9 after that performance last weekend, right, Luis?
Yeah, I'm really happy with it. As was undoubtedly mentioned in the broadcast, it's been about 5 years since I last updated a Pro Tour. So, that's a long time. I'm glad I was able to make it back. I certainly don't take it for granted, but very happy with it. Very happy with my team. All 20 of us just had great results. We were 40% of the top 25, which is pretty ludicrous considering we were 5% of the field. So,
yeah, definitely. Had to get you into the pregame slot, the sort of I crushed it last weekend slot of VSL broadcasting.
I mean, honestly, there's a couple things going on. One, obviously, I'm happy that I top aided. That's a big part of it. It's also awesome when your friends do well. It's I gotta admit, it's way less fun when you do well but your friends don't, because they're happy for you, but they're also they're not feeling great about their performance. And our team did really, really well. We had just a ton of great finishes. I also have to say that our team really came through. I was testing remotely and I did not make the Eldrazi deck, and having them put it together, all the guys from Face to Face and Channel Fireball who met in Vancouver. I keep saying this, but that's just because it's true. They made the deck, and I'm not saying that the people who weren't there didn't provide value, but I'm saying they didn't provide this deck, and this deck is what ultimately really was the difference. So you never know who's going to break it or where it's going to come from, but in this case it came from them, and I just have to keep giving them credit for it.
Yeah, that makes sense. It is rare that you see a Pro Tour format broken so completely in half as what you guys did. I mean, you weren't the only ones to find an Eldrazi deck. I mean, obviously the other variant of the deck wound up winning the tournament at the end, but 7% of the field up to 75% of the top 8. I mean, that just doesn't happen.
Yeah, I do have to give credit to East West Bowl. I think that's the name of their team.
Yeah.
Something weird, but they had the blue red version, which I do think was worse against a number of decks in the field because it didn't have Chalice or Simian Spirit Guide, which are both really important against gold fishing. Way better in the mirror, and you saw JC Tao just go through 3 copies of the same 75, which is it's so funny that he's got this good matchup and he plays 3 same 75 copies, which is that's where you want to be. You're on the top 8. If you've got a good matchup, playing at 3x is even a better deal.
Yeah, I think the JC Tao storyline is really cool too. I feel like this Pro Tour is one for the grinders. I mean, as much as it was cool to see some Hall of Famers get back in the top 8 for a while, this win is
that's the best story.
It's like everybody who sat in the back of the classroom and filled up all their notebooks with deck lists and, sat in the back of the car, going 6 hours to the PTQ or the RPTQ nowadays, I suppose. It's like on the right day with the right deck, I could beat the Hall of Famers, I could win the Pro Tour. And that's what the guy did. It's like 3rd or 4th Pro Tour he's ever played, 30-year-old accountant for Seattle. Hats off to him.
I do think that their team, I would not sell the narrative of their team being a bunch of ragtag kids. Their team is a bunch of great Magic players, and they spent a lot of time on it. They deserve what they did. And so it is, I think, a big part of testing is having a good group of people you can rely on. And it's not, I think it's important to draw the distinction between, their team, they had a GP winner in Andrew Brown. They had Ben Whites and Eric Severson, who we played for top 4 of GP Portland. Turned out both teams made it, but they had definitely a lot of accomplished Magic players on their team as well. But they didn't have a team full of Hall of Famers or Platinum Pros. They had some on their team, but it was not. You don't have to have that to succeed. I think having a lot of people who put in a lot of good work is really important.
Yeah, the description I was going for, I guess, is grinders. Which I view as a term of endearment. I mean, it's funny, when Marshall calls them all up, he's handing the trophy out to JC, and all the teammates. It's like, oh, those guys, right? I see them at every Grand Prix. That makes total sense. They're great guys to hang out with. Great Magic players. Just didn't have those breakthrough performances at the Pro Tour level until basically last weekend.
But you know what their team did not do as well as our team? They didn't sell the deck. We had 17 out of 20 members on the same deck. They had 4 out of 18 or whatever that ended up being, which makes those 4 guys feel very smart, and the rest of the team probably not feel great when two copies or whatever or 3 copies make the top 8. So two of their copies, sorry, but they had the best win percentage with their blue red deck. And I think what that means is next time that Ben Whites and JC and Andrew Brown are like, hey, this deck's great, their teammates are more inclined to listen.
Indeed. Yeah, I think they had 3 of those 4 guys had 9 wins across the 10 constructed rounds. 9.
Obscene numbers. And Yeah, that's what you get. I obviously everyone who plays Magic and who cares about Modern and is following this is going to be very interested to see what the next couple of weeks bring, because I think it's too early to call it. I don't think you can say, oh yeah, Eldrazi are here, that's the end. Like,
agreed.
I'm going to say the exact same thing that I said to you in the finals of the Pro Tour, which is that Elves are the 6 of the top 8 in Berlin, and by no means was Elves a dominant deck in that extended season. The Elves was just a good deck of many. It won way less than a bunch of other decks, so Eldrazi may be in the same spot, maybe not. I'm not saying one way or the other, but I am saying that it's not a done deal.
Yeah, I think that the GP weekend coming up is going to have a lot to tell in this story, right? There's 3 GPs that weekend. It's like Detroit, Melbourne, and somewhere in Europe. I forget which city. All playing Modern Grand Prix, all at the same time. And we haven't really had a format where it's got like the boogeyman with the target on its forehead quite this cleanly as we will have going into that GP weekend. So yeah, we get to find out if the metagame's going to react, and I'm sure R&D is going to be watching, and if the metagame can't react, sure, they're paying attention, they'll do something eventually, but I'm with you. I'm very curious to see what happens now. Yeah,
and I think that it's going to be interesting to see where it goes, and there's a lot of different cards you can try. So part of what's adapting to it is just trying to figure out where other people are at, and even just tuning the Eldrazi deck for the mirror I think is interesting too, because I was actually on Gabby Sparks' stream yesterday and we were playing the Eldrazi list that we played in the Pro Tour, and it's not that good in the mirror. It's got Chalice of the Void in it, which is not a great card. So seeing where people start putting in World Breakers and other nonsense like that is going to be interesting.
You're in the booth for that GP too, right? For anybody who's going to be watching it from home and can't get there.
Yep, GP Detroit. It's funny, people were like, hey, have your GP plans changed? You just top 8 at the PT. You got some points now. I'm like, yeah, actually, I'm going to go to Houston. I'm going to go to Detroit. And I'm going to be in the booth for both of those events. So I do have an eye on maybe doing better this year. But honestly, like, I don't know if I'm going to grind a ton of GPs or anything like that. I'm going to go to what I can.
Yeah. This
is a good tiebreaker. I got to admit, I'd love to play at Worlds. I haven't played since the first year, and it's not easy to get there. I'm not by any means a lock or even a favorite to play at Worlds. But if I play a bunch of GPs, I've got to at least give myself a shot.
So that sounds like a maybe, is how I heard that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to back out of Houston or Detroit. I guess maybe I could try, but I don't want to. I want to do coverage. I'm looking forward to those things. But I might go to other GPs in the U.S. that I was not currently going to.
Makes sense. So lots of fun stuff going on in Modern, but we're here to talk about Vintage. Let's start talking about this week a little bit. We should put the standings up, because to me...
Yeah, I like the standings.
Yeah. You're sitting there, second place, 3-way tie for second place. Really kind of is the haves and the have-nots. So like only Bob is sitting at 500. 5 of us tied for last, worried about relegation. 4 of you saying, yeah, we can cut to the playoffs anytime now. This will do just fine.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Well, one interesting thing about this is we're now in a situation where David Ochoa is very close to being locked, if not actually locked.
I don't think he's mathematically locked, but he's
very close. And you get to the point where everyone except his opponent wants him to keep winning. Because, it's the thing we've discussed where the people who are really ahead or really behind, everyone wants them to continue on that trajectory. So everyone's rooting for Webb now. Not that they weren't before. Everyone should have been rooting for Webb before. Webb is awesome. But if you want to make the playoffs, your best shot, realistically, especially if you're someone with like a 3-3 or 2-4 record, because those people are still alive, is to have Webb win all his matches. You can't catch him. You might as well have him just suck up match wins and take them out of the system.
Makes sense. Those deck lists are the deck lists from the second trimester. The other big news tonight, I mean, in addition to the standings and things starting to shake out, new deck lists. It's exciting. Now, I don't think we're going to see any Eldrazi, right? Mishra's Workshop does not actually cost colorless cards, so the Eldrazi don't.
I just learned that.
Yeah, right. Just learned that.
Is it too late to take Thought-Knot Seers out of my deck or no?
I'm going to go with yes, but I can't imagine that it matters. Although, I mean, look, maybe Ancient Tomb, I've Ugin, like maybe you could actually
Ancient Tomb is a very powerful Magic card, I'm just saying.
Ancient Tomb's already good enough, right? It's even better than Eldrazi Temple, obviously. I don't think the Eldrazi make the cut in Vintage, though. It seems like they're just... Lodestone Golem is just too much better to make you kind of fuck around with anything other than workshops.
If you could cast Thought-Knot Seer off Workshop, it would just be a slam. I think that would be absurd.
Oh, yeah.
But that's not where we're at. And honestly, that's the most interesting one because the duress effect is really, really good in Vintage. Whereas even if you could cast, like Eldrazi Mimic off of Ancient Tomb, it's just you're not really getting much out of that.
Yep, makes sense. You looking for any Oath of the Gatewatch cards then? So Warping Whale you sneak in here or there, or is it just more of the? Yeah, go ahead.
There are cards. We'll see what if anything makes the cut. But my guess is that it's going to have less of an impact on Vintage than it will on Modern or Legacy. I think Legacy Eldrazi are very real too. Our alien overlords are not not limited to just Modern.
Makes sense. So let's look at the schedule and see what we've got queued up for you guys. We kick off with a couple of Hall of Famers. Bob Maher and sorry, that's not the order we're going to be going in. That's fine. Our first match is actually Kai versus Eric. That's what we'll be playing first. And then you see how
that, you put everyone's greatest accomplishment in their tagline. Like Eric's the VSL Season 2 champion. I'm the VSL Season 1 runner-up.
Have you done anything better than that? I mean, that was the peak, right?
I've got to agree.
Yeah, Kai versus Eric kicks us off. I'm hoping the trend of players on the left having a significant winning percentage edge over players on the right continues into this week.
Well,
I gotta hope for something.
If that was your goal, you really should have put Eric and myself on the left. Also, Rich Shea. In fact, all three of the 4-2s are on the right there.
You guys can all have the win. If you beat the 2-4s, that's all good for me.
Yeah, you're not dead for top 4, but relegation is a much worse feat than the upside of top 4ing. So you definitely are looking at your big matches are the 2-4s, whereas Eric and myself and Rich Shea and Webb are all looking at each other, seeing how each other does.
Yeah, it's just true. I completely agree with you. The way relegation works this season, I mean, most of you probably been with us and heard this already, but everyone who is tied for last winds up getting demoted to the next season's play-in tournament. So we could easily have, 3 or 4 spots on the line in that play-in tournament, depending on how many people wind up tied for last. I mean, if it happened right now, we'd have this bizarro 8-person tournament with 5 spots on the line. Like you go 0-2 and you're still live. Could be a fun, which could make for a fun play-in tournament. We'll see how many spots we actually wind up with. Hopefully not 5.
Yeah, it was.
If it's 5, I'm probably one of them.
Well, yeah, it is funny when one match is the difference between a 5-way tie and a 0-way tie, like a one, just one person in last. So.
That's exactly what we happened in Season 1.
Yep.
Josh Utter-Layton lost the match that could have forced the gigantic tie. One thing I did want to mention, we mentioned this last week, but there is actually an Asia Vintage Championship coming up, and the guys running the tournament contacted me, asked if we could help them spread the word. Steve Menendian is actually going to be attending this tournament, which will be super sweet. So we'll have one VSL member, and former Vintage World Champion as well. It's actually a 24-person invitation-only tournament. They are planning to stream it. I believe they're going to have an English language stream, so that's something to look forward to on Sunday, March 27th. And the information here we've shown before, but I just got sent a picture of the first place prize. So check this out. They got together with Dan Frazier and asked him to paint them a first prize. How sweet is that?
That is awesome. I wish I could make it out there. That would have been a lot of fun to try to compete in that, but that prize is incredible.
Yeah, super sweet. So keep your eyes out for that. Happens late March, so it'll be a couple weeks after our season wraps up. Asia Vintage Championships, and I think they're hoping that this turns into sort of a big sort of annual tradition on the Vintage calendar. I mean, the Asia equivalent of Eternal Weekend is, I think, their goal. Well, I certainly wish them the best of luck. All right, let's talk about match number 1. I don't know, maybe you have information on what Eric is playing, but Eric versus Kai, new deck list week. What do you think is going on with these two?
Well, what Kai is playing is of great interest to me since he actually says he's one of my opponents in this trimester. And
okay.
What I had thought he might play is some kind of Oath deck or some kind of or Storm. So those were the 2 most likely decks. They were, in my estimation, the majority of his range, with something like workshops being a very small part of it, or just like a random blue. Basically, another other. I don't think he's going to play dredge. I actually don't think he's going to play workshops. He doesn't seem to like those decks very much. Okay. Despite his mono brown success in the past.
He won a lot of Pro Tours. That's only one of them.
Right. So my best guess was something like Oath number 1, Storm number 2, and then everything else number 3 without dredge. So we'll see if that ends up holding true. Eric has routinely said that Storm is the best deck, and it's not close. He also has played and done well with workshops. Whether he plays one of those 2 decks, I'm curious to see. So
you don't actually know?
I can't confirm or deny whether I know exactly what Eric's playing.
I have definitely not had any conversations with Eric, and I definitely see him as he's one of the guys that thinks it's a 2-deck metagame. I mean, my read on him is I would be shocked if he's on anything other than Storm or Workshops. I would guess Storm is more likely, maybe 60-40. Probably have him on 60% Storm, 40% Workshops is where I've got him.
Yeah,
and, go ahead.
I just agree that Eric's one of the proponents of this being a 2-deck metagame. I actually tend to agree also. I think that those decks are reasonably far ahead. Like, maybe not as much as Blue-Red Delver was ahead of everything back when you could play 4 Treasure Cruises, but still pretty far ahead.
So I'm tempted by this 2-deck metagame theory, but I keep seeing other decks have success. I mean, if you look at the top 8 from the latest Power 9 was pretty interesting, right? Mentor wound up winning that tournament. I mean, we were all busy getting ready for the Pro Tour. I don't know that I don't think either one of us got the chance to play it, but Rich Shea top 8'd with Oath because it's a Power 9 challenge. Of course, Rich Shea was in the top 8. Mentor winds up winning it. There's Dredge in the top 8, and then it's like, okay, there's some workshops and there's some Storm, but it felt like, judging on those results, I don't know. I don't think everybody else on Magic Online agrees that it's a 2-deck metagame.
Well,
I guess
2-deck metagame is like a range of what that could mean. I think that those are the best 2 decks. I think that Dredge and Oath are Dredge, Oath, and Mentor round out the top 5 for me. And when I say those decks are best, it doesn't mean that the other decks can't win. And the tournament, I'm sure, was composed of a mix of all of these decks. Yeah. So even if those 2 are the best decks, the odds that a tournament full of just a ton of different decks, the top 8's going to have a range is just that's what's likely to happen. I do think Dredge is kind of got an asterisk where, as always, if you play against a workshop deck that has 1 to 3 Dredge sideboard cards, you're never going to lose to them, basically ever.
Yep. Right.
Almost ever. But if they have 7 Dredge cards, you're an underdog. And
agreed.
The reason I don't think that Dredge is quite on the level of the other 2 is that I think that Storm is actually fine against Dredge even without a sideboard, depending on the Dredge build. The Dredge build can be built, like you had that build
Main deck Leyline of Sanctity. Yeah.
In Trimester 1 with main deck Leyline of Sanctity, and if you open on Leyline, you just win. Storm can't win game 1 unless they have a Chain of Vapor, which some do now, but most don't. And most of them happen on the sideboard. So if you're playing a Dredge deck, you could still lose to Storm and anyone who wants to sideboard, but you also just have these great matchups against the people, especially the shops people who don't sideboard against you.
I like that way of looking at it. I think it's a 5-deck metagame. I think Storm is the most powerful, but it's vulnerable to workshops, which sort of elevates workshops into maybe one of the top couple of decks. But I think that those 5 decks are all powerful enough to win a tournament on any given weekend, and good enough to show up in real numbers in a tournament. Yeah,
I don't want it to be confused by saying that these are the best 2 decks by saying that no other decks are viable, because I don't think that's true.
Okay.
This isn't Cobblade standard where if you weren't playing Cobblade, you were making a mistake. This is more like all of these decks have an aggregate win percentage of 50 to 55, except Workshops and Storm are like 57 to 60 or whatever the numbers end up being. Maybe some of the decks are obviously in the 40s then at that point, but it's a couple percent ahead of everything else, which is a big deal.
All right, so in terms of VSL, is VSL going to look like a 2-deck metagame tonight, or do you think people are going to actually mix it up this time around?
Well, there's a couple of things going on. One is that there's always people who try to next level, who try to, put opponents on a certain deck and then play a foil to that deck. That's clearly part of the fun of it. There's also, I'm going to think, some backlash of people who just don't want to play one of those 2 decks just because it's one of those 2 decks. I have heard such sentiments expressed. So if people are following that line of logic, they might make a choice they wouldn't otherwise make. And there's going to be some people playing those decks. I would not be confident in saying there are 0 Storm or 0 Workshops in this week.
Fair enough. Looks like we are getting Kai and Eric into their game. We are shouldn't be more than a minute or two until we get time for kicking off the week. I really want to see what people are playing. I mean, obviously, a lot invested in how the season is going to shake out. The top 4 do all advance to the playoffs. We haven't mentioned that system in a little while. Number 4 will play number 3 in the first week of the playoffs, and that is going to be best 3 out of 5. Both players, when we get to the playoffs for any given playoff week, actually bring 3 different decks to the table. That is, more specifically, they bring a deck A, a deck B, and a deck C, which are allowed to be the same deck, but since you can choose any one of your decks for the 4th and 5th matches, it's be pretty surprising if anybody did actually double up on their decks. So the 4th place plays 3rd place. The winner of that plays 2nd place. The winner of that plays, well, probably David Ochoa is going to be our 1 seed with the bye all the way into the finals. All right, awesome. Sounds like we are ready. Let's get down to the first match of the week.